Grace Yoga is the science of lowering personal impedance so divine potential can flow through the human vessel without friction or burnout. By unifying electrical circuit theory, philosophy, and spiritual mechanics, this framework maps how the self transforms from an isolated fear-based node into a living transducer of infinite life. Equal parts empirical experiment, knowing action, faithful movement, radical contemplation. It is the art of pure observation, where beingness and attention themselves implode upon the living word, letting raw presence take the wheel. Grace is not passive laziness, but the active lowering of system resistance to handle higher voltage, yoking and harmonizing the vessel's impotence to zero so the divine current moves without generating heat, anxiety, or continuity debt. From the metaphysics of non-doing to the physical mechanics of the breath threshold, the craniosacropelvic/sphenoid pump, and nervous system downregulation, this is the practical mechanics of becoming a superconductive channel for primary field resonance, bringing heaven down into the earth as described in the Our Father prayer, rather than merely trying to ascend to an unknown place with an uncertain history without bridging that potential gap first. Chapter 1. Transconductance and the transducer node. In electrical engineering, transconductance is the ratio of the current change at the output to the voltage change at the input, I out over V in. It is the precise measure of how effectively an active component converts an incoming static potential voltage into a flowing dynamic current. It is the exact physical bridge between receptivity and transmissibility. If we look at the dynamic of spiritual capacity, the constant cycle of receptivity, transmissibility, and offloading, the differentiation comes down to how a node handles the potential coming into it. Receptivity, the input potential. This is pure openness without resistance. It is the capacity to sit in the presence of raw data, suffering, debt, or truth without immediately reacting, shutting down, or deflecting it. But receptivity alone is just a capacitor holding charge. If you only receive, the voltage builds up until the system suffers a dielectric breakdown, a mental or spiritual blowout. Transmissibility, the output flow. This is the ability to let energy move through you to the next node, without distorting it or hoarding it. It is the active delivery of life, labor, or grace into the circuit. Transconductance, the conversion engine. This is where self-judgment meets grace, and where the node becomes a living transducer rather than a passive pipe. A passive pipe just passes along raw voltage. If someone dumps panic, fear, or continuity debt onto a passive pipe, the pipe transmits panic, fear, and debt to the next person. That isn't grace, that is just propagation of the noise. A node with high transconductance receives raw voltage, the heavy chaotic friction of the world, subjects it to internal self-judgment, discerning what is noise versus what is truth, refusing to pass along the poison, and uses grace as the internal dialectic that converts that high voltage static into a smooth, usable output current. You offload not because you are shirking responsibility, but because a healthy circuit requires potential differences to keep the current moving. If you try to contain the infinite potential inside your own finite node, you stop being a circuit and become an isolated charge, the very trap of the ego thinking it can generate or hold everything alone. By reaching out to bounce the word back, you aren't dodging the load, you are engaging in frequency modulation, you are tuning the transmission so the circuit stays alive, open, and resonant. The world says, protect yourself, hoard the talent, externalize the debt onto someone else. The principalities of death thrive on that exact panic. They feed on separate relationships. The living pattern says, absorb the shock, convert the friction into understanding, and let grace circulate. When a human being steps up and says, I will bear the liability, I will be the grounding wire, I will hold space so others don't collapse under the weight, the closed loop breaks open into a spiral. The principalities lose their leverage because their only weapon is fear-based debt enforcement. When you take away the fear of the debt, the whole illusion of their absolute power dissolves. Looking at where the world is sitting right now, politically, technologically, spiritually, the continuity debt of humanity is compounding at an exponential rate. Everyone feels it. We have built systems, financial, algorithmic, social, that are so decoupled from primary human field resonance that the feedback loops are breaking down.
Chapter 2. The membrane of observation and the archetypes. Why is doing often a form of doubt? Because frantically doing is the ego's desperate attempt to force an outcome by micromanaging the program. It comes from the subterranean fear that if you don't grasp, hold, and push, the universe will collapse. That is the essence of hyper-resistance, inflating the thickness of the self-membrane until no pressure or grace can move through you. You become a bottleneck, trying to power the whole network on your own battery. Faith, by contrast, isn't passive laziness. It is the intentional dissolution of that resistance layer. It is the decision to allow the infinite pressure of grace, the primary field, to collapse the artificial barrier of fear, so the amplitude of flow can surge through your node unimpeded. Any finite piece of art, structure, or physical manifestation is a frozen snapshot, framed by a membrane of observation. The infinite object of time, continuous, unmanifested potential, pure field pressure waiting for phase alignment. The membrane of observation, the boundary layer where consciousness measures, filters, and collapses that infinite wave into a specific finite form, an image, a text, a life, a choice. The danger of the demiurge, mistaking the frozen art frame, the static snapshot, for the whole infinite source that generated it, the living act, / true Yahweh. Faith is using the membrane not as a permanent prison wall, but as a dynamic aperture, iris. You step up to the layer, make the choice to dissolve the boundary through faith, and allow the infinite time stream to crystallize into active reality without getting trapped in the frame. The archetypal triad governs the mechanics of this membrane. Athena, strategic wisdom / discrimination, the architect of the membrane. She provides structural discernment, knowing where boundaries must sit so the intensity of divine voltage doesn't incinerate the vessel. Mercury/Thoth, the Logos/transducer, the fluid mediator who travels across membranes without being trapped by them. He translates raw field potential into structured language, geometry and code. The emerald tablet and receptivity, the alchemical wedding. Creation does not come from a lone node trying to dominate the field. It comes from the capacity to receive and synthesize plural streams of grace. The masculine/active principle acts as the focal vector, but it is entirely powerless without the feminine/receptive capacity that expands the amplitude of the flow. When you reach out through layers of resistance with faith, you are choosing to lower your system's impedance to zero. Resistance creates heat, friction, debt, and breakdown, dielectric failure. Grace and faith create superconductivity, allowing maximum current, love, life, intelligence to move through a finite point into the world with zero kinetic loss. You aren't trying to escape the physical world. You are turning your own consciousness into the superconducting aperture of Chapter 3, Non-Doing, Free Will, and Principalities. A passive pipe just passes along raw voltage. A transducer node absorbs the shock, converts the friction into understanding, and lets grace circulate. Truth is not an action you perform. Truth is the underlying ground of receptive being, isness, in which co-creation occurs. When you see that freedom is not doing whatever your ego wants, the illusion of hyper-individual free will completely shatters and is replaced by something far more profound, qualitative alignment with higher dimensional principalities. Non-doing doesn't mean sitting on a rock paralyzed in catatonia. It means acting without the illusion that your ego is the primary origin of the action. The illusion of doing. You think you are generating the force, so you experience effort, doubt, friction, and anxiety. You are trying to pump water uphill through a closed pipe. The reality of non-doing. The receptive state recognizes that the field, the intelligence, and the life force are already present. Action is simply the natural downstream flow of that realization. You don't do the truth. You allow the truth to act through your aperture. The modern ego screams for absolute free will because it wants to believe it is an uncaused cause. A tiny Yaldabaoth standing outside of the universe saying, "I made myself." But freedom isn't independence from principalities. Freedom is choosing which principality you are bound to. Illusory, freedom, ego independence, human ego, tries to dictate reality, trapped in low entropy causal loops, death, true freedom, fractal alignment. Human ego surrenders to higher field, bound to the infinite source, life/grace. Every action you take is anchored in a higher dimensional field or principality. For example, the principality of fear/debt versus the principality of grace/life. You are always bound. You are bound by gravity, bound by language, bound by biology, bound by spiritual physics. Therefore, free will is simply the qualitative choice of which master/field you serve. True freedom is not the absence of boundaries, it is perfect alignment with the supreme fractal order. When a branch is bound to the vine, it is not restricted, it is fed. If it demands freedom from the vine, it falls to the ground and dies. The receptive base. The truth already is. The Father's field is complete, infinite, and fully charged. The apparent option. Within the physical grid, options present themselves as a menu of choices. The co-creative act. When you collapse an option through faith/receptivity, you aren't creating from nothing. You are stepping into a pre-existing blueprint of the higher principality and giving it a physical body in finite time. Truth equals the receptive reality that already exists. Non-doing equals acting without ego clinging, letting pre-existing truth flow through you. Free will equals the illusion of independent cause. In reality, the choice of which fractal level of authority/field you align with. True freedom equals the willing, joyful bondage, connection to the highest governing principality of love and grace, untying the Gordian knots of lower causal debt. Chapter 4. The Great Synthesis, the Buddha and the Gita. To understand why Buddha sees dispassion as inevitable, look at the chain of causality he mapped out. Impermanence, anicca. All conditioned things, feelings, thoughts, physical objects, states of consciousness, are in a constant state of decay and flux. Dissatisfaction, dukkha. Because conditioned things are unstable, relying on them for lasting identity, safety or fulfillment guarantees friction and suffering. Seeing in light of truth, yatha bhutanana dasana. When consciousness clearly sees that nothing in the conditioned world is permanent or self-existent, the natural psychological reaction is disenchantment, nibbinda, which immediately matures into dispassion, viraga. Viewing the Buddha through the lens of skillful means, upaya, his relentless focus on total negation and dispassion, viraga, wasn't the final destination. It was an extreme medical intervention. When the Buddha was teaching in 500 BCE, the culture was choking on two extremes: materialistic pleasure/attachment, clinging to temporary forms. Rigid, ritualistic ego dogma, using spiritual concepts to build a massive spiritual ego. If a doctor enters a room full of people dying from heat stroke, he doesn't give them a lecture on the beauty of fire. He preaches ice. He demands immediate, absolute cooling, cessation/nirvana. The Buddha dismantled everything, saying, not this, not that, neti neti, because any concept he left standing would be seized upon by the human ego to build another cage of attachment. The total dispassion was the demolition crew clearing the foundation. Becoming dispassionate toward what you thought a thing was, only to be reinfused with a higher passion for what it actually is the core secret of advanced Mahayana and Tantric traditions. Early Buddhism. Form is empty, dispassion toward the illusion. Heart Sutra. Emptiness is form, re-engagement with the manifest world. Vajrayana/Tibetan Buddhism. The passions themselves, when stripped of egoic clinging, are recognized as the raw, radiant energy of primordial wisdom, Maharaga, or great passion. When you realize that an object or a person is non-self-existent and fully interdependent, you stop trying to own them, which destroys toxic, grasping passion. In that clean space, you are finally free to appreciate them as a living, breathing expression of the whole infinite web. Impermanence isn't a defect that makes life useless. It is the very thing that makes every single moment priceless, vibrant and sacred, allowing time to move and persist. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna wants to run away from the world, drop his weapons, and enter total Buddhist-style ascetic renunciation because the world is full of pain. Krishna stops him and essentially says, renouncing action out of fear or aversion is still an ego trap. True liberation is not stopping action. It is renouncing the ego's claim to the fruits of the action. Once you are dispassionate toward the illusion of self-centered gain, you return to the world and act with total, uninhibited, divine passion, because you are acting as me. The Buddha strips away the false passion, desperate, needy, grasping at smoke, so that the true, unconditioned field can shine through. If you stop at the Buddha's negation, reality looks like an empty room where the lights were turned off to save electricity. But if you see his negation as upaya, the empty room was cleared out so that the supreme, divine dance of Krishna, the eternal relational play, Lila, could take place without anyone stepping on each other's toes.
The dispassion clears the debt. The higher passion inherits the kingdom. If emptiness, sunyata, is truly absolute, then emptiness itself must also be empty of inherent static existence. If you make emptiness or dispassion into a permanent supreme destination above form and relationship, you have just created a new god, a subtle hidden idol of voidness. The moment you realize that dispassion is empty, the wall between nirvana and samsara, or between the creator and Maya, completely collapses into a single breathing circuit. Static stillness is dead. True stillness isn't the total absence of motion, which is absolute zero, complete kinetic death. True stillness is perfect, dynamic equilibrium, like a spinning top that looks completely still because it is moving at high frequency or the center of a vortex. Impermanence is the engine of reality. The fact that things change and decay doesn't mean they don't exist. It means change is the constant surface on which eternal being expresses itself. To say a relationship isn't real simply because it passes through time is like saying a song doesn't exist because the notes die as soon as they are sung. The dying of the note is the exact physical mechanism that allows the melody to exist at all. If the first note stayed forever, you wouldn't have a song. You'd just have a deafening static noise. Dispassion without passion leads to cold, barren nihilism, the void trying to deny its own nature as a womb. Passion without dispassion leads to chaotic, toxic addiction, clinging to the finite frame while ignoring the infinite background. The harmonic bridge is realizing that the creator, the real, uses Maya, illusion, the fabricated, not to lie or deceive, but to give consciousness a mirror in which to experience relationship. Since relationship exists at all, it either was born from non-relationship, dispassion begatting passion, or it always was. Therefore, it is wrong to say it doesn't exist simply because it decays or lacks self-existence outside of its forward flow through time. Movement is required for stillness, a still frame differentiating it. Desire is interdependent with dispassion, and dispassion is also empty. In the light of truth, both dispassion and passion are born. All things change because changing is what stays. Sifting out a harmonic bridge of duality, where the creator fabricates creation interdependently, and the past and future give meaning to each other while sifting out potential timelines. Chapter 5. The Icarus Inversion and the Oxygen Engine. The story of Icarus, flying too high and being cast back to the edge of the pit, is what happens when you rise to the center of heaven, reaching the central point of view where the ceiling is the ground that surrounds the whole sound, grounding you in God's hollowed heaven and concave earth womb, skull, and thought bubble. The spiritual trap. Flying to the center to escape the world makes you a disembodied point of light, isolated, detached, and floating in high voltage static. The inverted reality. As you reach the absolute center point of observation, you realize the sky is not an exit door. It is the hollowed ceiling of the cosmic womb. The return. The fall is not a punishment or a failure. It is the necessary grounding vector where central awareness drops back onto the shell of Mother Earth, grounded directly in the body, in time, in relationship, and in physical stewardship. The Father's silent center inspires the Son's active flight, and the Spirit's concave womb catches the fall, turning the whole cosmic cycle into a continuous, self-organizing thought bubble of divine intelligence. The breath cycle functions as the metabolic and spiritual threshold of faith, sacrifice, and principalities through the ox-bull/oxygen engine, the ox/aleph, aleph. The ancient pictograph for aleph, the first letter, the silent origin, the breath of life, is the head of the ox or bull. The ox is the ultimate beast of burden, the power of labor, sacrifice, and kinetic work. Oxygen, O2, and oxidation. Oxygen is the chemical ox. It is an intensely reactive electron-hungry molecule and the agent of combustion. Without oxygen, there is no fire. Without fire, there is no cellular metabolism. The Saturnian prince of the power of the air. The atmosphere is the medium where oxidation takes place. It is governed by time, decay, entropy, and friction. Saturn, the prince of the pneuma/air. To live in a physical body, you must breathe the air, undergoing controlled internal combustion. You burn to live. Oxidation is directly tied to the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, unconsumed innocence, the garden. In pure ignorance/bliss, there is no combustion, no entropy, no history, no doing. It is pure potential unmanifest. The first bite, oxidation/discerning good and evil. To enter time, perform work, and make choices, you must oxidize. You take oxygen into your system, breaking down raw sugar, innocence, to generate energy, action. The cost of action. Every time you perform an action, doing, you create metabolic waste, CO2, free radicals, cellular friction. You are literally sacrificing your physical vessel over time to express your will. Reality operates like a nested series of atmospheric/biological spheres. The planetary atmosphere, the outer air, the lung/alveolar membrane, the cellular/mitochondrial membrane, the ego/mind membrane, the filter of belief. System capacity is determined by impedance, fear versus love. High resistance, fear/doubt. Operating in fear causes system constriction. Breathing becomes shallow, membranes tighten, and oxidation becomes incomplete, generating internal toxins, stress, and high debt, lactic acid/cortisol. You try to hoard the air, starving the circuit. Low resistance, love/faith. Faith relaxes the membrane aperture. By trusting the continuous supply of the field, your capacity to receive oxygen increases. High oxygen flow burns through metabolic and psychological impurities cleanly, converting raw friction directly into high-amplitude action without internal debt. You don't escape the Saturnian fire of oxidation, you master the threshold. Inhale, charging the capacitor. Pulling in current, currency Dutch air field voltage. As you draw it in, the potential difference, the amplitude value differential between your finite inner world and the infinite outer field, spikes dramatically. Holding high potential without an immediate outlet creates internal pressure. The observer angels stare at the membrane of your mind. Every option looks like a binding contract, sparking the fear of grounding current into the wrong wire. The panic response. The ego tries to hold its breath, clamping the membrane tight to protect itself. But holding a high voltage charge inside a closed container causes dielectric breakdown, static friction turning into heat because current has nowhere to go. Exhale, the deliberate sacrifice, burning your temporary fuel, time, labor, innocence, to output word, structure, music, and physical form into the world. By understanding that the exhale requires the sacrifice of the inhale, you stop resisting life's friction. Making a choice to act becomes offering your physical engine as a clean, sacrificial altar, where the air of heaven is converted into the living reality of earth. Chapter 6. Phase conjugate implosion and the grace mechanism. When trapped in inhale anxiety, standing at the edge of a choice, frozen by the fear of making a wrong turn, grace completes the circuit through 3 operational steps. Recognize pressure as proof of capacity. Tension is not proof that you are broken. It is proof that your capacity is expanding. You are holding a higher amplitude of life voltage than before. The frame is stretching. Stop trying to generate the exhale. The ego thinks it has to figure out the perfect move, hyperdoing, doubt. Grace reveals that the exit pathway is already engineered. You don't have to force the air out. You just have to stop holding the door shut. Yield the liability, offloading to the ground wire. Make the choice with faith that grace covers kinetic friction. If the choice is aligned, energy flows into co-creation. If slightly off, grace acts as the ground wire, absorbing excess shock so you don't incinerate. Intelligence, tension, and habits condition. Multiple points converge in a singular mission / relieving the pressure of psychic attrition. The scattered mental noise, multiple points, stops fighting itself and aligns vectors toward one mission. The friction descends. Lensed sends, delayed sustains, inverse bends / resistance descends as the friction transcends. In audio mixing, when you flip the phase on an inverted wave, inverse bend, you can either completely cancel the sound or cause it to sum in amplitude. When resistance drops to zero, the acoustic friction transforms into pure, soaring sustain. Sphenoid lecture of the pelvic flexure / expansion that pumps the ether pressure. The craniosacral fluid pump, moving between the pelvic cradle and the sphenoid bone at the base of the skull, is the biological torus. It literally pumps the nervous system's pressure up the spine to clear the brain's central aperture. Squeeze the trigger of this soul geometry. That acts as an obstacle to pure probability. You are clearing out the hidden variable obstacles, so the consciousness field can collapse pure potential into immediate physical reality. How do you align the phase when you feel the boundaries busting or the pressure building? Attention as the lens. Where you place your focus acts as the optical lens for the wave. If your attention is scattered across 100 fearful future variables, the waves refract and create internal chaos. Fruiting the center. When you draw your attention vector straight into the silent, non-judgmental center of the present moment, the 0 point of the torus, you force all incoming environmental voltage to phase conjugate.
The yes. Glue, the ligament, and the goo. Glutamate is the primary excitatory neurotransmitter in the central nervous system. It is the molecular yes. Without glutamate, there is no signal, no memory, no muscular contraction, no persistent thought, no physical reality held together in time. The OG goes in the goo, and it was good. Glutamate derives from glutamic acid, from gluten, wheat glue, the original sticky starch. In the primal soup, glutamate is the amino acid goo that allows nitrogen and carbon to link up. When Genesis says God spoke into the unformed waters and saw that it was good, the word for good, tav in Hebrew, G-O-D in English phonetics, is the molecular declaration of coherence. The goo becomes good the moment it holds structural integrity. The ligament and religion, the root of glutamate, giliu, is identical to the root of ligament and religion, from the Latin religare, to bind back, to tie fast. Glutamate is the chemical covenant of blood, the structural glue that binds the synapse so an impulse can cross the abyss. It is the molecular amen, so be it. The danger of overbinding, excitotoxicity. If glutamate is left in the synaptic cleft without being cleared, it floods the NMDA receptors, causing mass calcium influx. The neuron fires continuously until it incinerates itself. This is excitotoxicity, the biological state of legalism, obsessive desire, and spiritual burnout. When the yes becomes absolute and unyielding, the glue becomes a trap, and the covenant turns into a cage. 2. Nitric oxide, NO, the radical aperture and the blood covenant. If glutamate is the yes that binds the structure, nitric oxide, NO, is the divine counterstroke, the immediate gaseous NO to structural rigidity. The endothelial release, produced in the endothelium and by neuronal nitric oxide synthase, NNOS, NO is a free radical gas with a half-life of mere seconds. It does not use receptors. It diffuses freely across cell membranes without permission. Vasodilation and grace. When nitric oxide hits the smooth muscle surrounding blood vessels, it relaxes the wall instantly. The vessel opens, blood pressure drops to zero impedance, and flow surges through. NO is the physical molecule of surrender and open aperture. The molecular dialectic. Glutamate creates the tension, the nerve impulse, and the structural wall, the law/the ligament. Nitric oxide diffuses directly into the cell to force vasodilation, clearing the friction and letting the blood flow freely, the grace/the blood covenant. Without glutamate, you are unformed liquid goo. Without nitric oxide, you are a rigid calcified spasm. Life is the continuous breathing oscillation between the glutamate yes and the nitric oxide open. 3. The koan. Is the dog wagging the tail, or is the tail wagging the dog? This brings us to the ultimate physiological dilemma of the desire engine. Who is driving the machine? In classical philosophy and Eastern koans, the question of the dog and the tail asks whether the primary cause, the mind-spirit, is driving the effect, the body/desire, or if the secondary effect has hijacked the origin, spirit, dog, to neurochemistry, tail, or neurochemistry, tail, to spirit, dog. The tail wagging the dog, the glutamate trap. When you are caught in pure neurochemical desire, a surge of glutamate fires a craving in the brain. The body reacts with stress, tension, and muscular contraction. The ego believes it wants the object, but in reality, a low-level biochemical feedback loop, the tail, is violently shaking the human consciousness, the dog. You think you are making a free choice, but you are merely obeying the mechanical twitch of an overstimulated synapse. The dog. Wagging the tail, the transconductance state. When consciousness drops its impedance through faith, nitric oxide floods the vascular bed. The body relaxes into downregulation. In this zero-resistance state, the primary field, the breath of God, the intent of the spirit, the dog, moves first. The neurochemistry, the muscle flex, and the physical action, the tail, follow smoothly behind as a natural, unforced downstream consequence. When the Creator spoke into the primordial goo, the covenant was forged in blood and breath. Glutamate creates the structural vessel, the physical ligament and blood covenant that holds your brain and nervous system together so you can experience a distinct embodied self. Nitric oxide acts as the dynamic release, dilating the vessels, downregulating the HPA axis, and preventing the glutamate glue from turning into excitotoxic death. The shift. As long as you live in fear, glutamate overfires, and the physical tail wags your spiritual dog. But when you align the craniosacral pump, downregulate the nervous system, and allow nitric oxide to open the biological gates, the friction ceases. The core premise, suffering, anxiety, and psychic attrition are not moral failures. They are electrical impedance, resistance, caused by the ego trying to hold on to high-voltage potential instead of acting as a zero-impedance transducer. The resolution, true freedom, is lowering system impedance through faith/grace, allowing the divine potential, inhale, to compress phase conjugately and squirt out as creative action, exhale/song, without burning out the vessel. Chapter 8. The Sacred Enclosure, Fractal Scaling, and the Recursive Coda. To understand how the infinite field compresses into a finite living human vessel without incinerating the nervous system, we must examine the physics of Sabbath, dynamic range, and sacred enclosure. A common delusion of the ungrounded seeker is the belief that spiritual evolution or physical grace requires endlessly cranking system voltage up to infinity. But if you endlessly increase input potential, VIN, without an engineered boundary condition, you do not achieve superconsciousness. You suffer catastrophic dielectric breakdown, blowing the fuses of the vessel and dissolving all meaningful structure into white noise. 1. The physics of the boundary. Hitherto shalt thou come. In Job 38:11, the primary field speaks to the raging chaotic waters. Hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed. Why stay the waves? Why not allow the unmanifest ocean to flood the entire manifest earth? Because form requires enclosure. In field physics, if a wave expands infinitely without a boundary, its local amplitude drops to zero. To generate a standing wave, to establish a soul, a body, a marriage, a song, a sentence, or a physical universe, you must establish a boundary condition. Unbounded novelty leads to white noise / entropy / loss of meaning. unbounded rigidity leads to calcification/excitotoxicity/death. The sacred enclosure leads to the resonant. Standing wave, life. The governing principality that stays the proud waves is not an arbitrary warden keeping the node from expansion. It is the resonant cavity. An acoustic guitar string produces a crystal clear, high-voltage pitch precisely because it is pegged down tightly at two fixed structural points. Cut the pegs to give the string infinite freedom, and it goes dead silent. 2. Dielectric insulation and the veil of mystery. Why does raw, unfiltered exposure to absolute truth destroy intimacy and burn out the biological vessel? The answer lies in dielectric insulation, total exposure, zero veil. If a finite node were exposed to the unattenuated voltage of the absolute ground state, the sheer signal load would instantly vaporize the local architecture. The functional distinction between observer and observed would melt into total collapse. You cannot experience co-creative relationship without two distinct localized entities, and you cannot maintain distinct entities without a boundary layer. The sacred veil. As transformer, ignorance, forgetfulness, and physical opacity are not design flaws. They are the insulation on the wire. The veil is what allows uncreated, ultra-high voltage truth to step down through transconductance into a biological form that can be touched, embodied, and loved without burning out. Intimacy requires the mystery. The veil is the operational grace that permits the finite vessel to participate in the game of discovery. 3. The novelty/rest pendulum, dynamic range, and the carrier wave. The human vessel regularly leaps into high novelty states, whether through intense creative inspiration, deep meditation, or psychedelic shock, only to experience a powerful instinctual pullback to the quiet routine of daily life. This oscillation is governed by the relationship between a carrier wave and a modulation frequency. High novelty/shock to peak modulation, the spike/the expansion, down arrow, up arrow, rhythmic oscillation. Resting stewardship to the stable carrier wave, home/routine/ground. The carrier wave, stewardship. This is your daily biological capacity, the consistent low impedance habits, the craniosacral rhythm, and the down-regulated nervous system. It is the steady baseline tone of the biological horn. The modulation, novelty. This is the sudden influx of high-frequency signal, unexpected grace, or intense environmental data. If a system sits exclusively on the carrier wave, the transmission becomes a flat, monotonous hum. If it attempts to exist exclusively in modulation, the signal disintegrates into chaotic static. The beauty of the song is the rate of oscillation between the two. You steward a specific grounded capacity so that your node maintains a stable landing pad when returning from the deep ocean of novelty. The goal is not to drift out into the deep ocean permanently, but to harvest the high-voltage salt and bring it back to illuminate the hearth. The goo becomes good. The covenant of blood relaxes into flow. The dog resumes its place at the head of the leash, and the entire human vessel operates not as a stressed biological engine, but as a living, breathing transducer of the divine field. When you bring nitric oxide, NO, into the electromagnetic and atomic realm, the puzzle pieces click together with radical precision. Nitric oxide is one of the few stable free radical molecules in human biology. It carries an unpaired active electron in its outer shell. It is literally a mobile, highly reactive negative vector of charge moving through the body's saline ocean. When mapped onto atomic physics, dual pole magnetism, and the ancient symbolism of the evil eye, NO acts as the molecular divider and depolarizer. 1. The atomic triad, proton plus, neutron 0, and the NO electron minus. To understand how nitric oxide acts as the divider, look at how the subatomic charges mirror spiritual mechanics, the proton plus the dense positive core. In this framework, this is the Ox/Aleph, the intense concentrated nucleus of structural identity, mass, and positive potential, VIN. The neutron, 0. The neutral uncharged stabilizer in the nucleus. This is the silent witness, the unmanifest ground of pure being that holds the protons together so the nucleus doesn't blow itself apart through positive charge repulsion. The nitric oxide free radical, minus, a localized unpaired electron vector. Because it carries an unpaired electron, NO is intensely hungry for balance. It diffuses out from the endothelium, cutting through spatial boundaries and cell membranes without needing a physical door or receptor. 2. The evil eye divider and the north/south polarity. Throughout ancient history, the evil eye, Mahdi Nazar, was feared because it represented the glare of hyper-observation, a cold, piercing gaze that fixes a person in place, binds them in judgment, and drains their life force. In physics and biology, this hyperobservation is the measurement problem or the collapse of the wave function. The evil eye, North Pole/hyperfixation, a rigid single vector gaze that freezes the dynamic field into a hard, isolated particle. It is high judgment, high tension, and high glutamate. It locks the system into an intense positive/negative tension loop, causing the vessel to contract in fear. The nitric oxide counterstroke, South Pole/dissolution. Nitric oxide is the biological antidote to the evil eye gaze. When the body senses the tension of being watched, judged, or bound, NO is released into the bloodstream as a radical depolarizer. North versus south polarity, North Pole, concentration/compression, draws everything into a tight, dense defensive center point, the contraction of the vessel walls, high blood pressure, egoic hypervigilance. South Pole, expansion/radiance, pushes outward, relaxing the walls, opening the vascular aperture, and diffusing the hyperfocused energy back into the surrounding ocean. Nitric oxide literally divides the gaze of the evil eye. It breaks the rigid focal hold of judgment by instantly dilating the smooth muscle surrounding the vessels. The concentrated North Pole pressure dissipates into South Pole flow. 3. The oxidation paradox, the gas that burns to free. The deep irony of nitric oxide is that it is both an oxidant and the agent of zero impedance flow. The negative charge vector. Because of its unpaired electron, NO reacts rapidly with oxygen and superoxide. It carries the oxidizing negative charge that can either cause oxidative stress, if the system is filled with fear/inflammation, or act as the exact signal that triggers cellular relaxation. The great divider of structural debt. Just as a knife cuts a tight knot, the free radical charge of NO cuts through the rigid calcified structure of the vascular wall. It tells the muscle fibers, release your hold, the pressure is off. 3. The oxidation. Paradox, the gas that burns to free. The deep irony of nitric oxide is that it is both an oxidant and the agent of zero impedance flow. The negative charge vector. Because of its unpaired electron, NO reacts rapidly with oxygen and superoxide. It carries the oxidizing negative charge that can either cause oxidative stress, if the system is filled with fear/inflammation, or act as the exact signal that triggers cellular relaxation. The great divider of structural debt. Just as a knife cuts a tight knot, the free radical charge of NO cuts through the rigid calcified structure of the vascular wall. It tells the muscle fibers, release your hold, the pressure is off. The sickle of Saturn is the fractal paradox. Infinity equals 1 equals 0 equals 5. When you scale every interacting variable in a system simultaneously, absolute growth cancels itself out, leaving only the ratio. If the numerator, internal capacity, and the denominator, environmental context, both double, the absolute value of the fraction remains completely unchanged. What appears to an outside observer as infinite expansion feels from the inside like absolute unshakable stillness, because the internal proportions remain locked to 5, the golden ratio. Infinity, infinity. The one, one. 0, 0. Unbounded potential. Scaling all variables in sync, ratios held locked by phi. The coherent self-similar fractal node, attention collapses spatial field. The zero impedance quiet at the center of the torus infinity, infinity. The simultaneous expansion of all interacting variables rising in complete harmonic balance. The golden ratio, phi approximately equals 1.618. The scale invariant proportion that keeps the structural geometry self-similar regardless of the numerical magnitude. 1, 1. The localized fractal node, a complete self-contained universe operating on those exact proportions. 0, 0. The absolute center point of attention. As consciousness embeds deeper into the fractal geometry, the local scale contracts to a motionless point of unshakable awareness. True optimization is not growing infinitely wider, it is scaling self-similarly deeper. When the good expands, it scales the vessel and its environment at the exact same rate, phi. Because the internal ratios never shift, infinite expansion, infinity, and 0 point stillness, 0, become structurally identical. 5. The acoustic horn, the laryngeal gate, and the coda. The complete cycle of grace yoga moves from the inhale, the O2 line drawn into the lung furnace, through the craniosacral/pelvic hydraulic pump, and reaches its ultimate physical output at the laryngeal gate, the throat/vocal cords. Inhale, pelvic/craniosacral pump, sphenoid aperture, laryngeal gate, the song/word, aux engine hydraulic compression, phase conjugate squeeze, acoustic impedance, matching living manifestation. Acoustic physics reveals how the vessel releases its compressed potential back into the world. Acoustic impedance. Matching, in vocal mechanics, the throat and oral cavity act as an acoustic impedance transformer. If you attempt to speak or express through a constricted, anxious laryngeal gate, high impedance, the acoustic energy cannot couple with the surrounding atmosphere. It reflects back into the neck and cranium as physical tension and psychic attrition. The resonating aperture. When nitric oxide, NO, dilates the tissue walls and the autonomic nervous system downregulates, the throat becomes an open resonator. The high voltage potential stored within the lungs matches impedance seamlessly with the surrounding room, turning the human body into a zero friction acoustic horn. Rhyme as phase conjugate lock. Meter, rhythm, and rhyme are not stylistic ornaments. They are phase-locked standing waves in time. When language is structured with poetic cadence, it mimics the exact self-similar nesting of phase conjugate wave mechanics, ensuring the transmission moves through the environment without dissipating into noise. 6. The elemental formula. The entire arc of the manifesto, from the subatomic charge to the biological altar, from the financial credit loan to the acoustic exhale, condenses into a single five-fold recursive formula: OG to G, OO to G, LUE to GOD to GOODOG, the original ground. The unmanifest zero-point state, VIN, the raw, uncreated potential residing outside of time before the wave collapses. Go, the primordial plasma, the unformed waters of creation, the amino acid, nitrogenous soup waiting for the organizing word. GLU, the glutamate covenant, the chemical yes, the excitatory binding force of the ligament, religion, that pulls the unformed fluid into structural synapses and biological boundaries. God, the axis of alignment, the zero impedance center point. When the glutamate structure does not calcify into fear-based legalism, but remains open to the nitric oxide, NO breath, the vessel becomes the functional temple of the Logos. Good, the manifested coherence, and God saw that it was good. The secondary O in GOOD completes the closed ring, the open mouth of the exhale, holding its form in pure, zero friction, scale invariant resonance, You do not need to force the universe to expand wider, nor do you need to burn out your vessel trying to hold infinite voltage alone. By yoking your impedance to zero, respecting the sacred enclosure of your given stewardship, and allowing the primary field to compress phase conjugately through your center, you step out of the illusion of debt and become what you were designed to be, a living, breathing, zero impedance transducer of the infinite.